Just a quick update on my book, Generations End. We're very proud to announce that it is now available on Audible. The book itself is narrated by the very talented Matt Godfrey. Check it out. I'll post the links below. And don't forget to review it. We'd love to hear what you guys think. Get Rich with Dividends by Marc Lichtenfeld. This book has the rare honor of filling 2 of my top 10 lists. The first one is the top 10 most boring books by far. The only book that's probably more boring than this one is Get Rich with Options. And then the one after that that's more boring is a book about economics. But this one is probably the most boring book I have ever listened to. And sadly, I've actually listened to it probably 4 times over at least. And you know why I've listened to it 4 times? It's because it's so boring that my mind tends to wander while listening to it. So I miss details and I've had to listen to it 4 times just to understand the basics. If you are having a hard time falling asleep at night, listen to this book. If you want to impress your friends at cocktail parties, don't mention this book. Now, the second top 10 list that this book makes it onto is also probably the most beneficial book, at least financially beneficial, that I've read in the past year, which is why I listened to it 4 times. Very boring book, but very, very beneficial if you understand the principles and execute it properly. As a matter of fact, Marc Lichtenfeld even says in this book that it is not a stock strategy that you will impress anyone with. Buying safe, old, stable companies that kick off a dividend of at least 4%, which you can reinvest and take charge of the exponential growth, most people don't care. But if you ever want to retire someday, definitely a good way to do it. Now, until reading this book, I hadn't had much dealings with stocks. And all the stocks that I had bought in the past had been the quote-unquote hot companies, tech stocks, stocks that were trendy companies like GoPro or ones like that are supposed to grow overnight 100%, which of course are very rare. However, in this book, those strategies are addressed but he also makes a good case on why you want to avoid risky gambles like that. Sticking with boring companies that pay a good dividend, have good dividend history, and the dividend is safe. And what's funny is the principles outlined and the criteria in which you should buy the stock are also the same criteria that my grandpa used way back when. And the funny thing is a lot of those companies that my grandpa invested in with the same kind of criteria that Marc Lichtenfeld points out are all the same companies that you should still be buying. For example, AT&T, Coca-Cola, ones that pay good dividends that you can reinvest and grow over time. He lays out multiple scenarios with various stocks, and in my opinion, it's more important that he runs it through the Great Recession around 2008. What would have happened to your portfolio? Well, of course, it would have taken a hit. But he points out that even though your portfolio takes a hit, if the dividend is safe, it's still buying shares. Now, the economy was in the toilet around 2008, so because it was in the toilet, the stocks were cheap, you had more buying power. So ultimately, that ends up being a good thing. He outlines a strategy that stands the test of time, one that should last into retirement, and one that doesn't require a lot of maintenance. It's a little tough for me to understand, but that might just be because I'm kind of a knucklehead. You might have an easier time with it. But for example, when he goes over the section about selling covered calls, I had to listen to that a few times. But once you understand it, it can be very beneficial. For example, my covered calls that I have been selling based on the dividend stocks that I own, which are ones that fit the criteria, you get the 4% or sometimes more annually from the dividend stock, and I've been averaging about 1% per month on the covered calls, which is about 16% a year, which is outstanding. All of which you reinvest into the stock so you can acquire more shares and thus sell more contracts, taking advantage of that dividend exponential growth. Now, what's really sad is this review is probably going to get very few views. It's not a fun book like Star Wars. It's not a fun book like the Bobbyverse books. And I love those books. They get me through lots and lots of hours of soul-crushing traffic and boring as sin job. But this book will help me quit that boring job years, if not decades, earlier than I would had I not read it. So like I said, most boring book I've read this year so far, but also probably the most beneficial and probably going to be the biggest impact on my life. I should point out that this book goes good with Richest Man in Babylon, which is kind of a vague outline of how to split up your money and prioritize it. Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is all about buying assets, not liabilities. And this book is a little more specific on what assets to buy as far as stock market assets, liquid assets. There's a lot to choose from, and this one helps you filter that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you guys have read it, what other stock books you guys have found to be beneficial, and I'll talk to you next time.